take the basement, Dad. My wife's parents are moving in upstairs." Those words still echo in my head like a door slamming shut. My name is Raymond Chandler, and I used to believe my family was ordinary, maybe even good, until the day I watched my older brother push our 72-year-old father out of his own home. Dad, Robert Chandler, was the kind of man people don't make anymore. Steady, faithful, and quiet. He built that two-story house with his own hands back in the 70s. Every nail, every board. When Mom passed, that house was all he had left of her. Daniel moved back for a few months, or so he said, when Megan got pregnant. I wanted to believe him. We all did. But little by little, boxes started piling up in the hallway. Dad's tools disappeared from the shed, and Megan's mother's china took the place of Mom's in the dining cabinet. I showed up one Friday evening to drop off groceries, and that's when I heard it. Daniel's voice, firm and cold. "Dad, you can stay downstairs. The basement's dry enough, and Megan's parents will take the upstairs bedroom. It just makes sense." Then, when Dad hesitated, Daniel added, "Or we can look into a nursing home. Your call." Megan stood behind him, rubbing her belly with that polite little grin that could cut glass. "It'll be so much easier for everyone," she said softly. I expected an argument, maybe even one of Dad's sharp looks that used to stop us in our tracks when we were kids. But he didn't fight. He just nodded, one slow, tired nod, and walked to his room. 15 minutes later, he came out with a small suitcase, the kind he used to take on fishing trips, and started down the stairs that led to the basement. His shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. I tried to speak, but my throat closed. Daniel turned away, pretending to check his phone, and Megan, she actually sighed in relief. "Finally," she whispered. When the basement door shut, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. Later that night, I drove back. The lights upstairs were off, except for the faint glow of the TV. I let myself in quietly and went down to the basement. Dad was sitting on an old wooden chair near the furnace, reading from his worn-out Bible. A single lamp cast a circle of light around him. "Dad," I said, "you don't have to stay down here. You can come home with me for a while." He smiled, the kind of smile that hides more pain than it shows. "This is still my home, Ray," he said. "A man doesn't run from what's his. He just adjusts." I wanted to tell him he didn't deserve this, that Daniel had gone too far, but Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out the remote for the old front gate, the one with the chipped blue button and fading label. He pressed it into my hand. "Keep it safe," he said quietly. "You'll understand one day." I looked at him confused. "Understand what?" He didn't answer, just turned the page of his Bible and kept reading, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Because that night, when I walked out into the cool autumn air with that remote in my hand, I knew something inside me had shifted too. I just didn't know yet that small, battered gate remote would soon open more than metal hinges. It would open a secret my father had been protecting all along. The weeks that followed felt like watching a slow-motion nightmare. Every time I stopped by my father's house, the air inside seemed heavier, like the walls themselves knew something was wrong. Dad slept downstairs now, in the damp basement that once stored Christmas boxes and tools, a thin cot, a lamp, and a single shelf for his books. Meanwhile, upstairs, Megan was repainting the walls, ordering new curtains, talking about a fresh start. Only she wasn't paying for any of it. My father's checkbook sat open on the counter almost every time I visited. Daniel called it helping Dad manage his finances, but I knew control when I saw it. One afternoon, I found Dad fixing the leaky faucet in the basement sink. Water dripped rhythmically, echoing through the concrete room. His hands shook more than they used to, but his mind was sharp as ever. "Dad, you don't have to live like this," I said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Son, peace costs less than pride." It broke me hearing that. Megan started telling everyone how kind Daniel was for letting his father stay under their roof. They had begun referring to the place as their home. It was a small change of words, but a cruel one. Each week, something else disappeared. Dad's tools, Mom's old rocking chair, the framed photo of their wedding. Daniel said they were putting things in storage, but when I asked for the storage address, he changed the subject. By early spring, Dad seemed smaller somehow. He'd sit by the small basement window at dusk, staring at the sliver of light that came through. Sometimes I'd catch him whispering prayers under his breath. One night, I went over after work. Daniel and Megan were out shopping for nursery furniture, so I brought dinner and helped Dad replace a burned-out bulb near the furnace. When he climbed the small ladder, I noticed his old desk in the corner, the one where he used to keep his receipts and letters. A folder lay open on top, papers slightly curled at the edges. It said, "Power of Attorney." At first I thought it was something he'd prepared years ago, maybe for medical reasons. But the ink was fresh. The signature line caught my eye. Robert Chandler, shaky but recent. And right beneath it, Authorized Agent Daniel Chandler. My stomach turned. I flipped through the pages. It granted Daniel full control over Dad's bank accounts, investments, and even the right to sell property if needed. My hands started to shake. I looked toward Dad, who was tightening the bulb, unaware. When he came down the ladder, I held up the folder. "Dad, what is this?" He froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the furnace. He took the papers gently from my hands, his fingers tracing the edge of his own signature. Then his shoulders sagged, and he whispered, almost to himself, "I didn't sign that. Not the way they said I did." I stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" But he just turned away, sitting down heavily on the old cot. His eyes drifted to the small basement window again, to that narrow slice of sky he could still see. "Some things, Ray," he said softly, "a man signs without realizing what's being taken from him." I wanted to push, to demand an answer, but something in his voice, that mixture of shame and exhaustion, stopped me. The light bulb flickered once, then glowed steady. Above us, footsteps crossed the ceiling. Daniel's. He was home. And as I looked at the papers still trembling in my hands, I realized something I hadn't before. Whatever my brother was planning, it was already in motion.
I took the folder straight to a lawyer, an old friend of our family named Henry Walters, who'd known my father since I was a kid. He read the papers in silence for a long time, his glasses sliding halfway down his nose. The only sound in his office was the slow tick of a wall clock and the faint creak of his chair as he leaned back. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Ray, this isn't a power of attorney. It's a transfer of ownership." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean, ownership?" He turned the papers around so I could see. "It says here your father willingly transfers full rights and title of the property at 183 Maple Avenue to Daniel Chandler, effective immediately." The date on the form froze me. January 14th. That was the week Dad was in the hospital for pneumonia. He could barely lift a pen, let alone sign legal documents. Henry rubbed his temples. "Ray, if your father didn't sign this knowingly, we're looking at fraud. Maybe worse." I felt a cold rush crawl up my spine. My own brother, the kid who used to follow me around the yard with a toy hammer pretending to build like Dad, had now stolen the house Dad actually built. Can we prove it? I asked. He hesitated. Depends on the notary. If the notary confirms he witnessed your father's signature, it's hard to dispute. So I tracked him down, a man named Victor Hale, the same notary whose name appeared on the bottom of the document. His office was a small corner space behind a car dealership. When I walked in and introduced myself, I saw the panic flicker across his face before I said a word. I placed the document on his desk. You remember this? He wiped his palms on his slacks. Yeah, that's Daniel Chandler's file. He said his father couldn't come in, but... He stopped mid-sentence. But what? I pressed. He swallowed hard. Look, he told me Mr. Chandler was bedridden and gave him permission, said he'd bring the signed copy later. I just signed off. You notarized it without seeing him? He looked down, shame written all over him. It happens sometimes, you know, family, emergencies. I didn't think it mattered. Didn't think it mattered. Those words rang in my head like a curse, because it did matter. That single stamp, that lazy signature had taken my father's home away. By the time I left Victor's office, my hands were shaking. The sky outside was overcast, that kind of dull gray that makes everything look smaller, sadder. I sat in my truck for a while, staring at the house across the street. A family having dinner, lights glowing through the windows. It hit me how fragile everything really was. One signature, one lie, and a lifetime of work could vanish. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a message from Megan. Tell your father to pack for the nursing home. No greeting, no explanation, just that. I read it twice, trying to make sense of the cruelty. Then a second message came through. Daniel says it's for the best. For the best. I could almost hear her voice, polite, sweet, rehearsed, the same tone she used when she told guests how lucky Dad was to have them around. That's when the anger stopped burning and turned cold, sharp, focused. Because in that moment, I realized they weren't just taking his home, they were erasing him. Everything he'd built, every brick, every board, every Sunday dinner, all of it, rewritten under Daniel's name. And as I sat there with the papers beside me and my phone still glowing in the dark, I made a silent promise. They might have thought the old man was too tired to fight, but his son wasn't.
That night, I drove back to my father's house. The rain had started falling again. The soft, steady kind that makes the world sound like it's holding its breath. When I went down to the basement, Dad was sitting in his chair, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His Bible was still open on his lap, though his eyes weren't on the page anymore. They were fixed on something far away. He looked tired, weaker than I'd ever seen him, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Ray," he said quietly, "sit down." I pulled up a stool beside him. He reached for the small remote lying on the table, the same one he'd given me that first night. He turned it over in his hands for a moment like it was something sacred. "Everything that matters," he said, "is inside that house, and now in your hands." Then he set the remote down in front of me. His fingers lingered on it for a moment longer before they slipped away. He coughed, a rough, deep sound, and turned toward the wall. After that, he didn't say another word. I sat there in silence, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing and the drip of rain outside. Something about the way he'd said, "in your hands," wouldn't leave me. When I finally left, the night air felt heavier, colder. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the remote lying on the seat beside me. It felt wrong, heavier than it should be. I picked it up,
turned it over a few times, then noticed the battery panel on the back was scratched, like it had been opened and sealed again. My heart started pounding. I pried the cover loose. Inside, beneath the batteries, was a small piece of electrical tape wrapped around something metallic. Carefully, I unwrapped it, and there it was. A tiny key, worn smooth at the edges, and a folded slip of paper wrapped around it. My father's handwriting, small, neat, deliberate. It read, "If they ever try to erase me, this will open what can't be closed." I must have read that line 10 times, trying to make sense of it. Open what can't be closed. What did he mean? I turned the key over in my hand. It was too small for a safe deposit box, too polished for a shed lock. But I knew my father. He was a man of routine. He didn't hide things without a reason. Then I saw it. Faintly written under the message, almost as an afterthought. Post Office Box 317, Maple Hill Branch. I felt a chill run through me. That post office was 2 towns over, the one where he used to mail his tithe checks every Sunday after church. I slipped the key and note into my wallet, sealed the remote back together, and started the truck. Before I drove off, I glanced back at the house. A light flickered in the upstairs window. Megan's shadow passing by, phone pressed to her ear. The house no longer looked like a home. It looked like a battlefield that hadn't realized the war had begun. I almost went back inside to wake Dad and tell him what I'd found, but something in my gut told me to wait. Whatever he'd hidden, whatever that note meant, it was his way of fighting back. The next morning, just after dawn, my phone rang. Unknown number. A nurse's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Mr. Chandler, your father was brought in a few hours ago. He's stable, but we need you here." I didn't even hang up properly. I just grabbed my keys and ran for the door. As I started the engine, I glanced at the remote again, sitting in the cup holder where I'd left it. That line from his note replayed in my mind. "This will open what can't be closed." And as the tires hit the wet road, I made a decision. Before heading to the hospital, I was going to the post office. Because if my father had hidden the truth, that key, whatever it opened, was about to change everything.
The post office was nearly empty when I walked in that morning. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of paper and dust hung in the air. I'd driven straight there from the hospital parking lot, heart pounding the whole way. I walked up to the counter and handed the clerk the small brass key. "Box 317, I said. She took it, checked the number, and nodded toward the far wall. "Right over there, sir, bottom row." The middle door creaked when I turned the key. Inside sat a single brown envelope, sealed and marked with a stamp from the Maple County Clerk's office. For a moment, I just stared at it. My father's handwriting was on the front, neat, careful, deliberate. For Raymond Chandler. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were 2 things, a folded stack of legal papers and a small black flash drive. The papers came first. At the top, in bold letters, "Addendum to the Last Will and Testament of Robert Chandler." I skimmed down the page, my eyes catching on every word. It had been signed and notarized 3 weeks before Daniel's transfer papers were filed. It read, "Any power of attorney or related document signed under duress or manipulation is hereby rendered null and void. The property at 183 Maple Avenue is to remain in the sole possession of my son, Raymond Chandler. He has shown me respect when others did not. He will protect this home." My throat closed. For a long moment, I couldn't move.
I could see Dad sitting at that old basement desk, carefully planning this in silence while pretending not to notice what Daniel was doing upstairs. He'd known. He'd seen it coming. I turned the last page. The signature was clear, steady, witnessed by a different notary from across town. Everything about it was official, legal, final. Then I looked at the flash drive. It was labeled simply, "For Ray." I plugged it into my laptop right there in the car, engine still running. The screen flickered and a single audio file appeared, recording 1.wave. When I pressed play, my brother's voice filled the cabin. "Just sign it, Dad," Daniel said, his tone impatient but controlled. "You won't even notice the change. It's just paperwork." There was a pause, a chair scraping, then my father's weak voice. "Daniel, I don't understand this part here." My brother's reply came lower, colder. "Don't worry about it. You trust me, right? Just sign. He'll be gone soon anyway." Silence, then a pen scratching on paper. I felt the blood drain from my face. I played it again and again until I could hear every tremor, every breath. The proof, his voice, clear as day, confirming what I already knew. He hadn't just tricked Dad, he'd planned to erase him. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so tight, my hands ached. The courthouse envelope lay open on the passenger seat, the papers fluttering in the breeze from the air vent. For a long time, I didn't move. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was cold, focused, almost surgical. Dad had given me everything I needed. The key, the proof, the plan. He hadn't asked for revenge, only for truth. When I finally started the engine, the reflection of my face in the windshield looked different, older somehow, harder. That night, I drove back to the hospital. Dad was asleep, pale against the white sheets, the machines humming beside him. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, and whispered, "I found it, Dad. I found everything." His fingers twitched slightly, maybe a sign he'd heard me. And right then, I made a promise, one I intended to keep. He wouldn't leave this world erased.
My father passed away 2 days later. It was early morning when the hospital called. The nurse's voice was gentle, practiced, the kind that tells you before the words even come. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the empty cup of coffee on my table, and for a moment I couldn't move. The house felt hollow without him. Even the silence had weight. 2 days after that, the service was held at the small chapel on Maple Hill, the same one where he'd married my mother 50 years ago. The same pews, the same wooden cross, the same sunlight falling through the stained glass like soft gold. Daniel stood at the podium, voice steady, eyes glistening just enough to convince the crowd. "My father was a man of faith and gratitude," he said. "He taught us the meaning of family." I felt the words burn in my chest. Family, gratitude. He spoke about honor and respect while the ink on his forged papers was barely dry. Megan sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, head lowered, perfect for the audience. People leaned in to comfort her. "Such a sweet woman," I heard one whisper. "They took such good care of Robert." I didn't speak, didn't correct anyone, didn't even look their way. I just sat there, one row behind Daniel, the sealed envelope from the post office tucked inside my jacket pocket. My father's real will, his real voice, his real truth. When the service ended, Daniel shook hands and smiled through his grief. Megan thanked everyone for coming. I waited until they were surrounded by well-wishers, then stepped out into the cold afternoon air. The parking lot was quiet. I could see my reflection in the window of my truck. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, but a strange calm settling in. My father had been buried, but the fight for his name had just begun. The following week,
I drove to Maple County Courthouse. The same brown folder sat on the passenger seat. The fake transfer of ownership, the notarized confession from Victor Hale, the audio recording, and the official addendum to the will, every piece lined up like puzzle edges finally meeting. When I walked into the county attorney's office, the clerk recognized my name. "Mr. Chandler, you're here about your father's estate?" "Yes," I said quietly, "and about a crime." She led me to an office where a middle-aged prosecutor with silver hair and tired eyes greeted me. I handed him everything without a word. He read in silence for several minutes, brows tightening as he listened to the recording. When it ended, he looked up. "Your brother's in serious trouble. I'm not looking for revenge, just the truth. My father deserves that." He nodded slowly. "You'll have it." By the end of the day, the complaint was filed: fraud, falsification of documents, and elder financial abuse. I signed every page, watching the ink dry, feeling the weight lift one layer at a time. But I didn't tell anyone. Not even Daniel. Not yet. He thought he'd won. The following weekend, I drove past Dad's house. The front yard was filled with new furniture boxes. Megan was out front with a measuring tape, giving directions to a delivery man. Daniel stood by the porch, smiling like a man who owned the world. I kept driving. Not a sound, not a word. Because patience, that was something my father had taught me too. And 2 weeks later, on a crisp Tuesday morning, while Daniel was sipping coffee on that same porch he'd stolen, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway. The deputy stepped out, a folded document in hand, his boots crunching against the gravel. He looked at Daniel, asked for his name, and said the words my brother never saw coming. "Mr. Daniel Chandler, I'm here to serve you this." The paper trembled slightly in the deputy's grasp, but his voice was steady. It was an eviction order, with Daniel's name printed across the top in bold, black letters.
Daniel always believed shouting could rewrite the truth. When the deputy showed up with the eviction order, he tore it in half right there on the porch and threw the pieces into the air like confetti. "This is a mistake," he shouted. "It's all lies." Neighbors peeked through their curtains. Megan tried to calm him, but he pushed her hand away. "You all set me up, my own brother." I stood by the gate, arms crossed, saying nothing. The truth didn't need my defense anymore. It was printed, stamped, and signed by the county clerk. The deed still bore one name, Robert Chandler. And by succession, that meant mine. Daniel stormed down the driveway, eyes blazing. "You think you can just take everything?" he yelled. I looked him in the eye. "I didn't take anything, Daniel. You gave it away when you forged Dad's name." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Shame, maybe. But pride crushed it before it could surface. Behind him, Megan stood on the porch holding their baby. The look on her face wasn't anger this time. It was exhaustion. "Daniel?" she said softly. "I can't do this anymore." He spun around. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. She just walked past him, carrying the baby to a waiting car parked on the curb. I recognized it, her mother's sedan. She placed the child gently in the seat, got in, and drove away without another word. Daniel stood frozen, watching the taillights fade down the road. When he finally turned back to me, his face was red, streaked with tears he didn't want to show. "You think this makes you better than me?" he said, his voice cracking. I looked down at the small gray remote in my hand, the same one Dad had given me. I'd reprogrammed the gate weeks ago. It only recognized one signal now. When Daniel tried to storm past me and press the button, the motor hummed, but didn't move. He hit it again. Nothing. "It only recognizes one owner now," I said quietly.
For a second, the world went still. The hum of the wind, the rustle of the trees, the ache of everything we'd both lost, all of it hung there between us. Daniel took a step closer, trembling with anger. "You think Dad would have wanted this? You think he'd want you standing here like you're some kind of saint?" I held his gaze. No. He'd want someone to protect what he built, and I did. He laughed, bitter, hollow, then looked away. "You always thought you were the better son." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the remote, the one that had hidden Dad's secret key, his last message. I held it out to him. He looked confused at first. "What's this?" he asked. I placed it in his palm. "No," I said softly. "Just more like him than you'll ever be." He stared down at it, that simple plastic piece, the symbol of everything he'd tried to take, and for once, he didn't have anything to say. I turned and started walking back toward my truck. The gravel crunched under my boots, the air sharp and clean after weeks of storm. Behind me, the gate whirred, the motor starting up again. I heard the metal arms swing shut, slow and final. And as it locked into place, I realized something. For the first time since this all began, the house sounded peaceful again. As I walked away, I heard the gate close, and it felt like it finally chose its side.
The house was quiet again. Too quiet. A few days after everything settled, I stopped by the county office to sign the last of the estate papers. The clerk slid an envelope across the counter. "This was left by your father's attorney," she said. It was small, sealed with plain brown tape. My father's handwriting marked the front, the same careful letters I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists all my life. For Ray. I saw it in my truck for a while before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No legal jargon, no instructions, just one sentence written in black ink. "Forgive, but never forget what truth costs." I stared at those words until they blurred. They sounded like him, firm, patient, merciful, even when the world wasn't. That night, I placed the note on the old mantel above the fireplace. The house still smelled faintly of sawdust and his cologne, like time hadn't decided to move on yet. I stood there for a long while, listening to the creaks of the wood and the soft hum of the gate motor outside. Then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Daniel. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, made me answer. His voice was barely recognizable, broken, heavy with something that almost sounded like regret. "Ray," he said, "please don't hang up." I didn't speak. He drew in a shaky breath. "They froze my accounts. Megan's gone, took the baby, the furniture, everything. I'm staying at a friend's place. I can't even find work. Everyone knows." I still said nothing. Then came the sob, sharp, raw, real. "I lost everything, Ray. The house, my family, my name." Silence filled the line. Finally, he said, "Dad would want you to forgive me." The words cut deep. Not because they were wrong, but because I knew he was right, about Dad. I took a long breath. My eyes drifted toward the window. Outside, the wind moved through the trees the way it did on the night I found the key. I thought about my father sitting in that basement, humiliated but unbroken, telling me, "Everything that matters is in your hands." I tightened my grip on the phone. My voice came out low and calm. "You did this." He started to say something, but I didn't let him. "He still forgave you." "I won't." Then I ended the call. For a long time I stood there in the dark,
the phone still in my hand, my reflection faint in the window glass. Somewhere deep down, I wondered if Dad would have wanted me to say something different. But forgiveness wasn't mine to give. Not yet. Outside, the motion sensor light flicked on, casting a soft glow over the front gate. The same gate my father installed 30 years ago, the one he fixed every winter, the one that had guarded his home longer than any of us realized. The motor hummed quietly, and the iron bars began to close. Slow, deliberate, final. I watched until they met in the middle, sealing with a soft metallic click. And for just a moment I could almost see him there, my father's outline by the post, hand resting on the old remote, eyes calm and steady. It felt like he was still here, making sure the house stayed safe. That night, as the gate locked for the last time, I finally understood. The house wasn't just bricks or boards, it was a promise. And now, it belonged, at last, to the one who kept it.